with the Salesforce Developers webinar with Renee Winkelmeyer and Zane Turner talking about modern app development and modular development strategies. So welcome, Renee and Zane. This is really exciting.
Thanks, Arabella. It's great to be here. So my name is Zane Turner, and I am joined by
Renee Winkelmeyer. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. And before we dive into talking to you about how you can bring modern app development to your orgs and get modular, of course, we have the most important slide in the world. We just want to remind you that if we make any forward-looking statements here, which you never know what Renee and I are going to say, we want you to make any purchasing decisions based on our currently available, completely awesome technology, not any peeks into the roadmap or things that may come into the future that we might talk about here today. So with that, you're here to talk about modular development, but we want to just start by talking about what really is modular development. And the idea of modular development is that you can take your changes, no matter what they are, and move them easily and reliably into, say, a single org, or even into multiple orgs, whether that's sandboxes or multiple production instances or any org that you choose. We really want those changes to be reliable and repeatable and to be predictable. So all those lovely little boxes that everybody's dealing with in this slide, those are those modular changes that we want to be able to move around to whatever org that we're working in. And how do we do that? Well, we do that with tools that fall under the umbrella of Salesforce DX. But what is Salesforce DX? It's a whole bunch of things. We talk about it all the time, but basically the quickest way to think about Salesforce DX is that it's both a set of tools and it's new functionality that help you build and deliver your apps. It's a whole bunch of stuff that lets you hook into open and prescriptive tooling, which means your favorite tools for continuous integration or delivery, your favorite tools for writing code, the standards you might be familiar with if you're working with other frameworks like .NET or some web technologies. It's also built for automation and automated delivery. As we're going to look at continuous integration and continuous delivery today and talk about how you can use that. But Salesforce DX makes it easier for you to use those kinds of tools because at its heart, Salesforce DX is also built for the enterprise. And by that, we mean your business or the business that your customers are hoping that you're going to help them run. It's built for real apps in the real world that you can rely on. So all of this is great. But what does this mean for building apps? So let's look at a typical app development lifecycle. We have great ideas that we plan, and then we want to move them into production, into a release. And to do this, we know that we use several different kinds of environments, right? We have our build sandboxes, our testing sandboxes, and maybe our staging and UAT sandboxes. And along the way, we do several different kinds of things. We're coding or we're working declaratively. We're trying to hopefully run some tests at some point and get some QA going. And this could happen across several different environments. And so we want to move changes between environments. And we have several different options for doing that, especially now with the world of packaging, unlocked packaging, which we're also going to look at. So because we have all these different options and we have all these different things happening in all these different environments, that can cause some challenges. Sometimes it's hard to know what got built where. It's hard to know if we actually moved our changes to every environment where we need it. It's hard to know if the change we built in one environment and the change we moved to another environment can get rebuilt and removed to another environment. Because in the end, this kind of app development lifecycle, which many of us may be dealing with today, is still relying on what's in a particular org, what's in a sandbox, what's in a staging environment as the source of truth. There isn't really a single source of truth. And this is how Salesforce DX can help us change this. With Salesforce DX, we try to drive our app dev from source control. We move version control into the center of this universe. And now we can see that we have our plan and then our coding and our building and our testing and our release. They're all wrapping around version control. We're not moving things around to different environments and changing it all the time. We're pinning everything to a source of truth. And then in this outer circle, those are all the tools and functionality that Salesforce DX gives you to build and deliver your apps. So what does this actually mean when we're putting it into practice? Well, let's look at a typical scenario where we're trying to build something And on one end, we have our developer sandboxes. And then as you can see, as we're moving to the right, we're getting into different environments, different sandboxes all the way to production. And here you can see we're moving changes using good old change sets. And as we're going to call them today, UI-based change sets. I go into setup, I click change set, and I start building it. And we can see this is how we're moving stuff between environments. Well, now just by using the tools introduced with Salesforce DX, the Salesforce CLI, we can now get a new command, new in Winter 19, called force source deploy and force source retrieve that let you work with, say, sandboxes and production environments and move changes from one environment to another using the Salesforce CLI and that retrieve and deploy command. So now without changing much about our app development lifecycle, Salesforce DX gives us another way to move changes between environments just by using the Salesforce CLI. But what if we want to add source control into this picture? So we have our UI-based change sets. We are now maybe starting to use the CLI to move some changes around, but we want to add in version control. So now instead of moving our changes just between orgs, we could actually move our changes in and out of source control, which means now we can do that with multiple kinds of environments. We can now have more regular changes. If I build it in a developer sandbox and I get it into version control, we can know that that change can more easily be pulled into all of these other environments. And also because we can use the Salesforce CLI with any environment. So now we have some kind of version control in here, and we can do even more. Because we're driving from this single source of truth, we can now say add in new environments into the mix. I can move Scratch orgs into my development mix. And now whether I'm working in the Scratch org and Renee's working in a sandbox, we can each get the changes out of the environments we're working in, get them into source control, and then move them into the other environments where our team needs to see them, like our QA environment or our staging and integration environments. And because we have version control and because we can use the CLI to move changes now between any kind of environment, we can also set up automation. We could bring in continuous integration and continuous delivery on top of this, just by putting version control into the mix and using the Salesforce CLI. But what if we want to do even more? What if now we have some version control going on, we're starting to look at continuous integration and continuous delivery, we're using the CLI. Now what if we want to add packaging, that new way of moving changes between environments into the mix? Well, we can. What packaging does is it lets us say, build a set of changes. On the bottom line here, we have our Scratch orgs where say I've made one set of changes, they're in green, and then I want to create a package and I want to create a package version, and then all the way to the right, all those other places you see those green dots, that's my package version getting installed in any other kind of org. And it's the same piece of changes. So now I know that the exact changes I made can go into that package version and they can go anywhere. And the changes that Renee makes, maybe in that orange package, he can create a version of it and we can install it anywhere. And now this giant slide with a ton going on is literally every option that you could have at your fingertips for building and delivering apps. And it's a ton going on, all the way from UI-based change sets that you're probably working with today to unlocked packages that you may or may not be working with. And this is a lot to absorb. So I want to show you this in a demo. Renee, does that sound good? Should we get into the demo?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so for this demo, we're going to show you all of this in action. We're going to go from an app that has nothing in source control to getting it into source control to making an unlocked package and all the stops in between. That's what we're here to do today. And to do that, we're going to use a sample app. If you go to trailhead.salesforce.com and look for the sample gallery /sample gallery, you're going to see a whole bunch of sample apps. And today, Renee and I are playing the part of developers for the Easy Spaces sample apps. So we're going to take Easy Spaces, an event management company that doesn't use source control and is just getting started with app development, and we're going to take them all the way to using unlocked packages. Sound good, Renee?
That sounds great. Can I start with a demo, please?
I think that sounds great. I'm going to let you go ahead and take us into the demo.
Okay, there we go. Okay, as a Salesforce developer, I'm starting in VS Code. And as I work with sandboxes, I first have to do the very first step, right? I have to authenticate my tooling with my sandbox. And for that, I'm using the Salesforce CLI. For those of you who are familiar with the CLI, that you may have used it already for working with scratch orgs, but one feature of the CLI is also that you can authenticate against any kind of org. So I'm just doing this, fourth auth web login, and this will allow me to log in using the web-based login to any kind of org. And as you can see, we have a bunch of parameters over here, and the most important one is first set alias, right? So I'm saying -a because I want to give this a name. I don't want to reference this org within any further CLI commands by using my email address, but I just want to give it an alias that I can remember. So I'm calling this easy spaces sandbox. And now I can actually log in over here. And if I would have a real sandbox, and I have to be transparent, I'm just using a developer edition in this demo. But for using a sandbox, I would have to pass the -r parameter and point that to https://test.salesforce.com or any custom domain that you have for your environment where you want to log in. So in my case, I don't need that. So I'm just removing it. I'm hitting enter, and this will now start a standard browser screen. And I'm going to log in with my awesome Dev1 user, easy spaces, my super secret password. And there we go. I'm logging into my environment, which is great. Let me quickly go back to my VS Code environment because you now can see that the CLI is successfully authorized against that org. That means in any further commands using the CLI, I can use the alias easy spaces sandbox and run any kind of command against that. Okay, let's go to my sandbox environment. Actually, I'm a developer, and I just got information from production that something in my space management app is missing here. And when I click here, I see that I'm missing the reservations manager over here. So let me quickly check in setup if it's actually defined. And I have a guess that something is wrong with the permission set. So let me go to my permission sets. There we go, the space management app. And object settings. So reservation manager. Let me quickly check that. Oh yeah, I see. The checkbox isn't set to visible. I mean, that can happen. So let me quickly click on edit, make it visible, and refresh my environment. There you go. There's the reservation manager. So now, as you know, when you work with a standard sandbox, you can only deploy using UI-based change sets any changes from a sandbox to one environment. But what happens if you have multiple environments where you would have to deploy this change to, right? And the best way is using the Salesforce CLI and VS Code, using Salesforce DX and bringing your metadata, and also in this case, my changes, to source. And we're going to do this in the next step. So let me go back to VS Code over here. What you see here on the left is that I created a blank Salesforce DX project, right? No source in there, standard git ignore, force ignore, all the standards that you likely already saw in other demonstrations. And this is a foundation for using the Salesforce CLI communication with my org. And as Zane mentioned, we can now get metadata using the new Salesforce CLI commands, new in Winter 19, from any kind of org, which means also a sandbox or a developer edition or a production org. So let's look at this command, sfdx force source, and I want to do a retrieve. And the retrieve command gives me a couple of options. So first of all, I can specify a manifest, a package XML, as you know that, which is the foundation for which metadata will be pulled from my org. Or I can also add, for example, a list of metadata component names if I don't have a package XML. But let's take a look at what should be most familiar with you, the package XML. And I already created one over here in this project. And if you look at this, it looks really familiar, right? It's a package XML, as you know that from all standard deployments.
Except, Renee, I'm noticing something.
Exactly.
I'm seeing that, yeah, I'm noticing that what you don't have in there. And can you tell us why that is?
I don't have a wildcard in here. Because
so no
you have
star
to make
selects, no
exactly,
Apex
no
class star.
Yes, I don't want to pull any craft, anything into my source, because when you and I, in this case, start thinking about how should I work with my metadata, how should I move changes around, it is important that you just don't pull your whole org into source at once, right? I think it's a really good thing not to pull your whole org into source at once. Identify chunks that make sense to you, modularize from the beginning when you really, like in this case, pull the first parts of source from your org, right? Please no wildcards.
Start small and get bigger. Maybe start with the things that are brand new development more than pulling in the biggest, oldest part of your org. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so I have my SFX4 source retrieve, so I'm saying -x. I want to have the package.xml, and I'm passing -u, because this is a parameter where I can reference my alias. So I have easy spaces sandbox.
So this is where you're telling the CLI what org to go grab metadata from.
Exactly, and this command is also using the metadata API. It's not using the tooling API, which some people would likely prefer because it's a bit faster, also when deploying. But the metadata API is the best API to fetch all metadata because it's completely supported.
Yep.
And as you can just see on my screen, all metadata got pulled. My project got populated. So I have all the metadata in Salesforce DX format already prepared by the CLI for me, which is pretty cool. But having said that, I have now my changes and my app pulled down from my sandbox. And on the other side of the pond is Zane, who actually wants to work on some changes too. And as good developers, we are working with source control, right? So I'm going to create a new commit. I say for Zane, I'm going to add everything, and I'm directly pushing to master because we are great developers, right? No branches, we're just pushing to master.
Oh, right, exactly, and the way we always do.
Exactly, exactly. And now this is synced to Git, and from there on, Zane can take it. So let me make you a presenter. There we go.
Yay. All right. So I am also in Visual Studio Code, and now I need to grab Renee's changes, and I actually want to work in a Scratch org. So Renee did a lot of cool stuff just then, but one of the coolest things he did was he used the integrated ability for Visual Studio Code to talk to whatever your source control mechanism is. And in this case, Renee and I are both using GitHub. And he used that built-in ability to push those changes up to the repository we're both working on. And you can see that right here. I also have the same integration with Git right here from my navigation menu. But I can also work a different way in VS Code, which is one of the reasons we really love it, because it lets you work the way you want with sharing tools. So I'm going to use an integrated terminal session right here. So it's for me, because I'm on a Mac, it's just like the same as having a command prompt window or a bash window open. And I'm going to go ahead and do a git pull from master, which Renee just did here. So I'm going to do a git pull origin master. And because I am, oh, look at this. We're already seeing that I had already made some changes here. Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky. So I'm going to go ahead and stage my changes real quick and say for Renee part 1. And here we go. This is live demos here. So I'm using my integration with VS Code. And now I'm going to go ahead and run my git commit again. We'll start it again. So we're going to
writing my name properly, which is amazing.
Always. All right. So now we see we have our changes here. And I'm going to look at what I just pulled down from Renee. So we can see that I got all the stuff that he pulled out of his sandbox right here now. I see classes, I see Aura components, a whole bunch of awesome stuff that he just got out of his sandbox. And you know what? This Salesforce DX format means that now I can use, I'll get us a little more real estate here, and I'll zoom in to make it really big because it's super exciting. I'm going to use now a completely different command. I'm using SFDX force source push because I'm going to use a sandbox, and I've created the sandbox in the background and set it as my default, so I don't have to have any other parameters, but I'm going to take what Renee just grabbed out of his sandbox and I'm going to send it to my Scratch org right now. So while this command is running, it's going ahead and using the metadata API behind the scenes, and it's pushing up all of this good stuff that Renee got out of his sandbox up to my org. And it's handling all the conversion back and forth from this DX format into the metadata API format. That's the great part of these force source commands, whether it's retrieve or deploy. As a developer, I can just aim it at the environment I want to work with and use the right command. So we see right here, I added a whole bunch of stuff. And now he changed some permission sets. So I need to go ahead and check that those permission sets got updated. So let's get us a little more real estate, clear out my terminal. And now I'm going to run some permission set assignments. So I'm going to do force user perm set assign. And no, you don't have to memorize all these things. I'm just doing it because I know this one. We've been working on this app a lot lately. So there are actually 2 perm sets in this org. So I'm going to assign the first one here. Easy spaces objects is the first one. And then this is where our first check to make sure everything deployed correctly comes. Looks good. My perm set was there. And now I'm going to go ahead and check the one that Renee just updated, that space management app perm set. And once I've assigned that to my user, then I'm going to want to go into the UI and make sure that Renee's changes are there as expected, and then also finish my own changes. So I'm going to use SFDX force org open, just like Renee did. And now I'm in my default browser. We're going to open up our Scratch org, and I'm going to get that into where you can see it. Okay, so I'm here now in my Scratch org, and I'm going to go ahead and go into our space management app, and let's check and make sure that Renee's changes look exactly the way we want. Right here, first thing I see is the reservation manager. Looks great. Great job, Renee. Okay. So now I need to get my changes in. And what I've been working on is a theme. So we have a custom theme for Easy Spaces, and it used to be a lot harder before winter to move themes around in packages or in source control. But now you can add those to source control, and that's what I need to do right now. So I'm going to go ahead and activate this theme, make sure it looks good. We have a new dark theme for Easy Spaces in winter. It's really exciting. And this is looking exactly like I want it to be. So now I need to get these changes out of my Scratch org and back down onto my machine and into the same source control repository as Renee is using. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back into VS Code, and let's go ahead and make some more real estate here. And now I'm going to run a command to go look at the status of changes in my org. So I'm running SFDX force source status. And what this is going to do is it's going to just tell me what's different about what's on my machine versus what's happening in my org. So now I can see right away if I'm getting only the changes I like or whether I've left something out. So I can see right here that I added a whole bunch of theme stuff, which is exactly what I want to expect. Renee's changes were already in source. These are the only changes I added. So now I'm going to do an SFDX force source pull to grab my changes from this org and get them down onto my machine. And then when this command completes, I'm going to follow the same flow that Renee did of I'll check my changes into source and push them back up. So we can see we added all of these things into I can see I have new folders, new metadata assets. And again, the CLI took care of converting that into the right format for me. I didn't have to do anything other than say, hey, I want to go grab these changes. So now that I have these changes on my machine, we're going to do for Renee part 2. And we're going to get all of these changes checked in. And I will also do the same thing of pushing straight to master. Using the built-in integration here with VS Code, I don't even have to type git push origin master. It's doing it for me. And now, Renee, what's next?
Next would be that you give me screen and I will show.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, this is amazing, right? And the next step will be now to basically, fetch your changes, because I am the package master. So what I did now is
anyway.
Yes, for sure. So I pulled down Zane's changes from master because we're really good developers and we're only working in master. This joke never ends. And what I actually want to do is I want to create a package, because now that we have everything in source, the next goal should be to create a non-modifiable version of source that you can then deploy to any kind of org, be it a standard sandbox, partial sandbox, user acceptance, multiple production orgs, DE edition, you name it, right? So I have my source in here, but now I want to create a package. And the way to go is using unlocked packages, which are also GA with Windows 19. And the very first thing that you have to do once you have all the source that you want to have in the package, using SFDX force package create. You may want to assume that this will create a package, but it's not. So when you run this command, it will create kind of a bucket, a name within your dev app. And it's not a namespace, right? So that we're just clear on that. So let me quickly check the available parameters for that. First, I can give it a name. So I call it Zane and Renee show. It's really long. And this name allows me to later reference this package using the CLI. So it's basically kind of an alias. Okay, so I have the Zane and Renee show. I give it no namespace because I don't need that. I have -t because I have unlocked packages over here, which is also brand new because unlocked packages are not reserved for partners. So also customers can use this, which is pretty amazing. And I have to pass the -r parameter over here because I want to define where my source lives. The reason for this is you can have multiple folders within one repo that hosts your source. So you have to define for which folder you want to specify that. So I'm running this command. It will only take a few seconds. And it would be great if you pay attention to the top, to the SFDX project JSON, because this one gets automatically updated by the CLI. So first of all, based on the path that I passed as a parameter, the CLI identified my package directory over here. It set the package name, Zane and Renee show, version name, version number. So this is something that you can also customize for yourself. But even better, because you see there's no ID over here, right? No Salesforce ID. So how would you reference that? Well, at the bottom, we have package aliases, which is also brand new. And with this custom setting in this JSON file, the CLI is capable of identifying and basically matching a name to an ID, which is really cool when you have multiple package versions, for example.
Yeah. So that means that it's easier to like script this, right, Renee?
Oh, absolutely. Because once you would create new package versions, and we're just going to do this in a few seconds, you don't have to remember anything. You can basically rely on the alias, which is pretty cool.
That is
okay.
Really
so
cool.
let's go and create a package, right? I mean, that should be the next logical step. And the command for that is sfdx force package version create. Now, don't get scared, because you have a bunch of parameters available for that, as you can see over here. And this is just a lot which you won't need when you start your very first steps on packaging. So let me actually clear that and remove them, because this looks like really frightening. Package version create. And you would only need a few parameters that you would have to pass to the CLI. First of all, we have the -x parameter. -x specifies that you won't need any special installation key, right?
So a password, or we could password protect here if you wanted to.
Exactly. And then I would define -p. So what is -p? Let's see here. The package that I want to reference. And this is usually the ID, so the one that you see over here in the SFDX project JSON file, or I can use my alias. And I want to do this, right? So I define -p and say Zane and Renee show. And this is pretty cool, because now I have a fixed identifier no matter the ID behind this. They can just reference this over here. And one important parameter that I want to use also is the weight parameter, which you can see at the bottom. And this parameter is really important, because if I omit this, the CLI
like I always do.
won't. Yeah, and it happens to me too, right? So if I omit this, the CLI will just execute this command and won't wait for the final execution. But the latter, the final execution, is needed so that the CLI then updates the SFDX project JSON file. And you will see that in a minute. Okay, so I'm just adding a special def app from mine. I think that's the one that I use. Yep.
Crossing my fingers for live demo.
Yeah, exactly. But we have so many different def apps, so that like, okay, that won't work. So I have to create this in my, there we go. So this will now run the command. It will create a package version. Zane, do you want to explain what happens behind the scenes?
Yeah, so what's happening behind the scenes, the reason that you see that Renee is getting back an asynchronous message saying that, you know, the request is in progress and that it's going to wait and we have to wait for versions, is because behind the scenes now, Salesforce is making a version of your package. And what that involves is taking all the metadata that you promised was in your package in that force app folder when Renee ran the package create command. And it's taking that and it's trying to deploy it to a different org. It's checking to see if you got the dependencies right, if you structured your package correctly, if there's valid metadata in there. So the real test of whether or not you made a good package is in fact this versioning process, because it's trying to deploy your stuff behind the scenes and see whether or not it can do it. And if you get back a package version successfully, it means you have something that is deployable, that's reliable. That's what this command is doing.
Exactly. So there are also some caveats. I mean, when you work with Scratchwork, for example, you may have configuration settings in your org that you have to basically kind of copy from your production environment, right? Mm-hmm. So also this process takes the configuration that you have in your project's Scratch dev file, right? Which is really important to know, because when there's something which is not supported out of the box for Scratch orgs based on the configuration setting or as a metadata type, even if you can run it in a sandbox, you likely won't be able to use this as a package version creation.
So it takes the shape that you've defined right there into account when it's building it, right?
Exactly.
So if we have dependencies, let's say we have multiple packages that have to be installed, or we have to have a managed package in there before our stuff can be installed, we can also control that right here.
Exactly. There are additional options, and we will show that later in a GitHub repo with the actual Easy Spaces app. So this may take now a few seconds. While this is running, I want to point you to one really important part, and this is the metadata coverage report. This is also new since summer 18, so this summer, and got this updated look and feel, which you can see on developersalesforce.com/docs/metadata coverage, and you also can filter on a release version, and it gives you an overview of what kinds of metadata are actually supported. Right, so if you want to start with unlock packaging and you see that you're using something like approve a process. It's not yet there, which gives you a great overview when you want to start to dissect your org's metadata and you are identifying the pieces that you actually want to use with this technology. You can make an educated decision based on this report, which is pretty cool.
That's a great resource. And so you see over there, metadata API, of course, we know that those are those metadata deployment capabilities. And the source tracking column means, is it going to be picked up by those commands that Renee and I use, those force source deploy and retrieve, or force source push and pull? That's what that's telling you. And then the unlocked packaging column is what Renee said, and managed packaging is now, if you're an ISV partner and you're listening for something called second generation packaging, that's the managed packaging column, that new version of packaging. And then classic packaging is going to be first generation managed packages. And change sets, of course, is our UI-based change sets that we talked about. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in this report, including known issues now are integrated in one place. If there's an issue with a particular metadata type, it gets picked up here, and you can go click into that and say, this also affects me as well. It's one place to get all your information.
Which is pretty cool, right? So this is one of my most favorite bookmarks when I work with metadata, because I can directly see where can I use it and what is the right path for me to go at this time.
Yeah. So Renee, do you want to show us the Easy Spaces repo?
Yes, but in the meantime, hang on, the package installation succeeded, as expected. Yay. And now we have a new alias, the Zane Renee Show version 010, also with a package ID. And you can now take this package ID, for example, as you know from unmanaged packages, and either install it using the Salesforce CLI or just using the standard browser URL junction that you maybe use from credit projects, for example, and install it into every kind of org. Because this is now a fixed piece of metadata that doesn't get changed, and you can, for example, create multiple versions for that. You can override that, you can deploy that and script that, which is pretty amazing.
That's really awesome.
I really like it. Yes, so let's see how we actually use this in one of our sample apps. And
so this is the Easy Spaces sample app that you can find if you go from Trailhead and you click through to GitHub. This is what you're going to find.
Exactly, it's on github.com/threaded-apps. And it's the Easy Spaces one. And what I'm showing you right now is the configuration file for our CI system. And we're using, in this case, for continuous integration, Circle CI. And besides the standard configuration, which, what a proper CI process has, like installing Salesforce DX, authenticating the dev hub, and many, many other things, we also use this example as a reference for working with packages and also with multiple packages within one repo. So this kind of cryptic definition over here defines if any GitHub branch that we're using contains the word packaging, we are actually authenticating against a specialized UAT sandbox. So we're using also, and we're using this down here in also another configuration, which basically means based on branching strategy and branching names, we're actually testing packaging of our source code after we just submitted a pull request on GitHub. So let's scroll down to the part where you should see something or not see something. Because when we create and install a package, or when we want to create and install a package based on a branch name, I'm actually running a script. And let me quickly go to my script. And you will see a few things that look like, oh, we had this, right? ES-based objects. It looks like package versions.
Yep,
right?
Those are our package version aliases, right?
Exactly. So basically, I have here in my script some versions already that I use for testing, but it's even better down here, and you don't have to completely read this, but I am reading the output of the SFDX project JSON, and based on that, we are reading the package aliases like the Zane Renee show, and creating new versions out of this alias to actually test them in a sandbox. And this completely automated. So once someone sends a pull request, we're creating the package version, install that. If that fails, we actually know this already before we are hitting, for example, a UAT sandbox, which is pretty cool.
That's really awesome. And so this is here so you can look at it and you can look at this script if you're interested in setting it up. But Renee, can you just show them what are the basic package directories that you said we were going to look at?
Yep. So we have two things. If I go to the root of the repo, you see that we have 4 source folders. You'll likely know from a standard project that there's a force-app folder, but for our use case, so in this case, Zane basically split up this app into 4 different sub-apps, right? And in the SFX project JSON, we define those apps, so those parts as package directories. And based on the path, we get everything like a package which only contains the objects, another package which only contains styles, as well as code, and the actual Easy Spaces space management app. And this means we have dependencies as we see it over here, right? What does that allow, Zane?
That means now, so what we've done is that we've split out, say, our base objects package. If Renee scrolls all the way back up, that's our base package. And the reason we named it that is you can see there are no dependencies under it. That package has no other dependencies. And then if we go to our base code, which is a shared code base, then you can see that it needs the objects to be there. And this is how we're controlling how the pieces of our org link together. And if you want more information about this, we are going to give you more information about where you can see exactly how we built this and exactly how you can start trying to modularize your org this way. But we wanted to show you in GitHub, this is how you define the relationships between all those different modules, all those different pieces of your orgs, whether or not you're putting those into unlock packages or you're just keeping them in version control.
Exactly. So do we have a few more slides?
We do. You should hand it back to me because this is how we're going to give everyone the resources about where they can learn more and where you can see what we were talking about. So I'm going to hop back into slides. Woo! And so you just saw a whole bunch of stuff. Like we promised, we took Easy Spaces from having stuff in a sandbox. Renee used package XML and pulled it out. He got it into version control. Then I pushed that stuff into a Scratch org, and then he created a package and a package version from that, and we even got the installation URL. We didn't all the way install it, but we could have. So you saw a ton of different stuff here. So how do you go deep into this stuff? Well, there are a ton of different resources here. You can see that you can become a Salesforce DX Trailblazer on Trailhead, going through the traditional badges of application lifecycle management, which will take you through normal change sets and things you're used to, all the way to learning about version control and source control strategies and branching, and getting started with unlocked packages. We have a few bit.ly links here. This Getting Started with Salesforce DX is a great refresher of, I don't know what Salesforce DX is exactly, what all is included in that. This series will take you through it, and it also will take you through some of the scripting that Renee has started doing for us. If you want to start automating things and jobs, this series really takes you through it. And then this bit.ly down here on modular development, hiding under the mountain, is going to walk you through exactly how we built Easy Spaces. And we took it from a Keynote sample app in an org all the way into modules in source control, and this series walks you through how to do it. And your job will be even easier because we didn't have force source retrieve or force source deploy when we built Easy Spaces. So you get to cut out a few steps. And with that, I think Arabella, do you have some housekeeping for us before we go into Q&A?
No, I think that's about it. We can jump straight into Q&A if you like. You ready?
Yeah.
Great.
Sure.
So I'm noticing a lot of the questions that we have coming in from the audience today is in regards to VS Code. And I think for the folks that might have missed your previous webinar, you covered VS Code quite a lot the last time we had the Zane and Renee show. So do you want to spend a couple words talking about that one and what people can watch after this webinar is over so they can learn more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we, what was it, 2 weeks ago now? We did a webinar on VS Code for Salesforce developers. It was a repeat of a session that we actually offered twice at Dreamforce as well. So if you Google Salesforce developers VS Code, and we can also get the bit.ly link into the chat or the deck here and share it as well, you'll see several different recordings. We have the webinar that's recorded, and we have our Dreamforce presentation as well that takes you into how to use VS Code and what are those extensions we were using to connect to source control or to connect to our Salesforce tools. Renee, anything to add?
No, not yet, I would say.
Not yet.
No, not yet. So the VS Code space and also the Salesforce CLI space is really hot at the moment. And we are aware of a bunch of upcoming changes that you will likely see soon-ish. That make VS Code even more powerful. Like I saw last week a tweet from Nathan Totten, who is the product manager, about extending the capabilities for autocomplete on the SFX project JSON file, as well as scratch-off definition files. So you don't have to remember all those parameters or go to a website. Basically, VS Code will give you autocompletion, which is pretty cool. So
Great.
Stay tuned and really start with VS Code soon.
There are a couple of questions about that, Renee. So how did you get that neat autocomplete going on there in the demo? So can everybody start working with that now, or is that kind of a...
So that's another kind of autocomplete. I saw those questions. I will put it in the blog post. Yep. This is an open source project by Wade Wagner. But having said that, the Salesforce CLI team is also working on, for beginning of next year, I think, safe harbor, on general autocomplete features of the CLI across operating systems.
Yep. And in the meantime, if you don't have that extension installed, like I don't, and you want to know what's going on, if you're running any sort of command, so we're going to do force source commands, for example, I can do --help, and you're going to get more explanation about that particular command. And you can run, I think SFDX force docs will also give you every command that you can run. So built into the tool itself are helped prompts that you can use, and you can do this at multiple levels. So if I know that I also want to run a force source push and I type --help, I'm going to learn about the parameters specifically for that command as well. So Renee's autocomplete that he's installed is really nice for giving it to you without typing, but if you don't have it installed, it's already part of the CLI.
Great.
It's the efficient German in me.
Sorry, what was that? The efficient German?
Yeah.
So not a question, but just a comment here I wanted to share with you both. Folks are loving Git flow and packaging. They're saying that ISVs in particular will love it. So good to know. And of course, this we have a question here about pricing. So is Salesforce DX free, or is to start using this, is this something I have to talk with our AEs with?
So the tooling is free, like the VS Code extensions, Salesforce CLI. You have some limits, as far as I know, based on edition in terms of active scratch orgs or scratch orgs that you can create daily.
Or numbers of requests to create a package that you can have daily. Just like other things, you got to pay attention to those limits. But to turn on this functionality and to get started using these tools, that is not something that you should have to talk to your AE about. It is free.
Okay.
Exactly. If you don't want to enable the dev hub yet in your production org, which also doesn't impose any costs, you can just enable. This is also new with Winter 19, the developer hub in any developer edition org. You only get 3 scratch orgs, so not a lot, but you can just spin up a DE edition, turn the dev hub on, and get started.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a couple of broader Salesforce DX questions as well. So I will say that there were a couple of resources that were mentioned at the end. So the first one was Salesforce DX development model. The second module that folks might want to go through is app development with Salesforce DX, and we can share these links out after. But another very quickly question about Salesforce DX is, can I move to Salesforce DX a little bit at a time, or do I have to move my whole code base at once?
You should move a little bit at a time. That is exactly going to be the way that's going to make you happier. Then, as Renee said, you don't want to try to pull everything out of your org all at once. You want to be careful about breaking apart your org. That's why we're talking about getting modular. But also, even as we showed on the slides, Salesforce DX is a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm here in VS Code, and this, this integrated terminal experience I have here, the fact that I can run this FXDX force source help is because I have the Salesforce CLI installed. That's a tool. I can integrate with different things here built into VS Code because I also have installed in VS Code all of these extensions that Salesforce provides. It's another set of tools that I can use. Things like this replay debugger, which we showed in that webinar we just did. There's a whole bunch of different tools involved with being with Salesforce DX. So you can pick a tool like the CLI and get started with just that and layer on more pieces as you go.
Great, thank you for that. So we got the next question here. Unfortunately, some of us have to deal with record-based configurations that come imposed by third-party Salesforce apps that we integrate upon. What's the best way to incorporate them into this amazing workflow?
So I think that I'm hearing a couple parts of this question. So part of it is that we have managed packages in our orgs, and we need to build with those managed packages. We integrate with them. And so part of that will be then getting those package dependencies into your project definition, like we showed, that if you need that package to be installed in order to have certain other customizations, other parts of your code base or your customizations installed, that's one way to get it there. The next way is going to be thinking about dependencies and starting to get better dependency management in your orgs. And there are some resources that we're building on that right now. And in the unlocked packaging for customers, there's a packaging readiness check that actually starts walking you through how to think about these dependencies and some of the concerns that your team's going to have to be ready to tackle to start untangling those dependencies. And that's on Trailhead.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So here's a question. What type of permissions do users need to deploy or make changes in the CLI? Do they need system admin or specific permissions?
So there was a new permission added with Summer. I don't have the name right now, which basically allows that. So access to metadata, but not to data in an org.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you don't have to open up all access the way you used to allow someone to deploy changes. It's a metadata only permission, and it's new in Summer 18.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of DevHub related questions here coming up now. So the first one is, do we need access to DevHub to use source, deploy, retrieve, and unlock packages?
Yes. Yep. So some of the commands that you run through the CLI, which this person's getting at, need you to connect to a so-called dev hub. And so as Renee mentioned, developer edition orgs can be also turned into dev hubs. They have more restrictions than your production org might. But if your team is looking at turning on this functionality and you're not quite sure if you want to turn it on in production yet, you can use a developer edition org to get started with these commands and develop against any org. So some of the commands will require dev hub access, but you don't necessarily have to turn it on in production.
Okay, so a couple more DevHub questions here. So did creating the package register with DevHub, meaning that other Scratch orgs based on the same DevHub can refer to this package by alias?
No. So this alias is actually not stored in the DevHub. It is part of the local SFDX project JSON. So from there on, you can reference that. If you want to use the package version from another computer, for example, where you don't have this current project on, this current source code, then you would actually need the ID and can't use the alias.
Mhm. And I think part of this is also how do you share your stuff with your team? And part of that then is is the ability to password protect packages or to mark them as, we didn't even look at marking them as released, which lets you control whether or not you could even push them into production. So there are different ways to make sure that only your team is installing your stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. We're almost out of time, so we just have one more comment, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions that people are asking in the blog post. Last one is, curious, does Rene use a light European springtime theme for his desktop?
Do I? No.
Also, great job today. I think if you go to the next slide here, we're always available and responding on Salesforce Devs on Twitter. And if you have time, and if you want to see more of the Zane and Rene show, let us know, either online on the network, on the social networks, or on Twitter, Facebook, or on the survey. So we'll be sending out a survey. Let us know what you liked, what you wanted to see more of, what you want us to have less of in the future. And I just wanted to have a quick reminder, in the next slide, we've extended the deadline for your super special developer keynote badge. Both of these folks were really great in the developer keynote for Dreamforce. And a lot of what they showed off there is going to be shown in the slides, both in the webinar today and in the keynote. So another quick note, you're going to see both Zane and Rene on the road. And remind me, I think, Zane, you're going to be in New York soon. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll be at the New York World Tour.
And Rene, you're going to be pretty far from Germany.
A bit only, right? In Noida, I will be keynoting the developer keynote at India Dreaming, which is our largest developer, our largest community event in India, which is pretty amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to that. I want to see photos from both of those places. They sound amazing and completely opposite. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to thank you all for setting aside the time to join us today. Don't forget to answer the survey, and we'll see everybody soon online. Thanks again.